You know, I just got word in that
Yes.
we have Eric Ulis here on the line.
Great.
So, Eric, can you hear us?
I can hear you just fine, guys. How you doing? I'm going to adjust my
fine.
camera a little bit here. Hopefully that's
Absolutely.
fine. I'm
That
just trying
works.
to tweak it a little bit. I'm all Hollywood, I'm trying to make sure it looks good. So either way. So how you guys doing?
We're doing good. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. We really appreciate it. Right down the street, Rhode Island, Massachusetts up here. So, we appreciate the time being here. I'd like to introduce you to Rich Little. He's my co-host here on the podcast.
Hey, Rich, how you doing? I'm doing well, Rich. How you doing?
Good to see you.
So, Eric, we've been discussing for the past 45 or so minutes about the DB Cooper case. Really, we've been taking a mathematical view of this case. I've heard on other podcasts that, you're a very serious guy. You don't like to deal in conspiracies, and you're very straightforward with it. How do you view this case, and how has your view changed over the past couple of years or even decades?
Well, as far as how I view the case, obviously it's the only unsolved skyjacking in American history, so that in and of itself makes it noteworthy and frankly just an interesting and intriguing mystery. And I think the more the time has gone by, that also adds something to the allure of the case. When it was, back in 1971 or shortly thereafter, 72, when it happened, I think the way people viewed the case was more or less a hot crime, an immediate crime, and I think, DB Cooper was sort of immediately a cult hero right off the bat, but there was a certain perception that the public had of the guy. 50 years out, 54 years out now, it's almost something that it's hard to realize or consider that it actually is a real event. This really happened, and this was a real person, and we're not talking Bigfoot here or the Loch Ness Monster. This dude really rolled, So I think that sort of adds to the allure of it. How my perspective on this thing has changed over the years, obviously I've greatly refined my understanding of the case and who I think DB Cooper was, but fundamentally speaking, when I really got engaged with the case, which was probably about 2007, 2006, something in that time frame there, I believe then and I believe now that this case is solvable. Absolutely. And I firmly believe that now. In fact, I think it's imminent. I think it's very, very close to being solved, and that's primarily because of the advances in science and technology.
Now, I've heard you say on different shows that you believe that this case will be solved by the 60th anniversary. Do you still believe that?
I think there's a very good chance it's solved by the 60th anniversary. I wouldn't be surprised if it was solved within the next year, to be honest with you. Yeah.
What advances have really pushed the investigation? I know that you had, motioned at the FBI to let you access the DB Cooper tie and tie clip to do testing on it with a professional.
And yeah, that's I had to grab my Dunkin', by the way. My coffee, so that's a New England thing. Everybody in New England appreciates that. But to answer your question, I think the real turnaround here, or where a lot of progress is being made, really lies on two fronts. One is the tie and the tie particles. The tie that DB Cooper left behind has been analyzed extensively, or at least particles that have come from the tie have been analyzed extensively under a scanning electron microscope multiple times now. And that tells a story. The evidence tells a story. And that's where I live. I'm a guy who focuses or zeroes in on the evidence, because it's like I've said before, the evidence doesn't give a shit what you or me or anybody else thinks. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't care. The evidence is the evidence. The evidence speaks to the truth. It doesn't have an agenda. The evidence cannot lie. It tells a story. And our job, or my job as a serious investigator, is to look at the evidence and try to ascertain what the evidence is telling me, what it's telling us, what the truth is, and understanding how it's all put together. So that's why I like that, because again, it's unadulterated. Now, again, so the scanning electron microscope analysis of the tie is critically important. And also, frankly, the DNA, the enhances in DNA testing. When the FBI first pulled genetic material off the tie for the purpose of trying to affect some sort of DNA profile, this was 2001. Uh, 2001 to 2025 in terms of DNA testing is like light years apart. I mean, this is the Wright brothers versus Star Trek kind of difference. So it's very, very important to understand that touch DNA in particular, which is what I'm primarily interested in, the one part of the tie that didn't even exist in 2001. In fact, the first sort of um, inklings of touch DNA and that type of thing being viable started occurring about 2005. Fast forward 20 years to 2025, and again, we're in a completely different world. So you can have a very small amount of genetic material and learn an awful lot. And metagenomic DNA testing, all this kind of stuff. So I have a lot of hope that ultimately the DNA will play a critical part in determining who this guy was. The very big problem with that is the FBI, is law enforcement or the authorities, and specifically the FBI, because they obviously hold the tie in their custody. They've been unwilling to play ball. They've been unwilling to really entertain the offers of serious-minded people like me and a DNA specialist to gain access to the tie, see what we can pull off in terms of genetic material, expend private resources to sort of sequence what we can sequence. They've been unwilling to do that, which is somewhat frustrating. Or even something as simple as maybe just hand over the profile that they have, which is currently locked in the CODIS system, the partial DNA profile that they pulled in 2001. I mean, if we could just even get that could be helpful. Now, having said that, we can't be certain that the 2001 profile is actually DB Cooper's. It's possible that it's somebody else. So, but nonetheless, if the FBI were willing to play ball and let us have at it, I think that would definitely help. But one way or the other, we're going to figure out who this guy was.
Sure thing. Rich, I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, we looked at some of the candidates today, and I was comparing them to the artist sketch that was done within days of the hijacking. And I've found that there is recognition, this facial recognition, that they can compare a sketch to a photograph. Do you know of anybody that's done any work on that to try to eliminate some of those candidates that have been identified as DB Cooper? And I know that the sketch that was done by the FBI is just that. But has anybody ever done a comparison between individual photographs and that sketch to see if there's anything there?
The short answer is yeah, but not anybody that's credible. And let me explain that. As far as I know, the FBI law enforcement hasn't done that, and for the obvious reasons, because it isn't worth anything. Which sketch? You've got multiple DB Cooper sketches, which just by sight, just by looking at them, you can tell are materially different, and that obviously is critically important. But I know there was one television show that tried to use, that sort of artificial intelligence or, facial recognition stuff. And I don't remember ultimately what happened, but it's honestly, it's just kind of a waste of flipping time, to be honest with you. Yeah. And the reality of the situation is DB Cooper, it seems likely to me that he altered his appearance in some way. It may have been as simple as just combing his hair on a different side. Maybe he dyed his hair with Grecian formula. We know he wore sunglasses, so that didn't help as far as his eyes are concerned. Maybe he had a beard and then shaved it off. I mean, there are a number of ways to easily alter your appearance just enough to make it that much more difficult for people to identify the guy. So I just don't know that there's really any value in the, facial recognition stuff. Now, if you had an actual photograph, different story, but sketch, no go.
Now, you've had an extensive conversation, or multiple, with Cliff Erriman, the control tower operator.
Ammerman, Cliff Ammerman.
Ammerman.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and a little bit about how the control tower lost connection with Flight 305 and what the consequences of that may have been now with your theory?
Well, I know what you're talking about. Cliff Ammerman, importantly, was not in the control tower. He was with Seattle Air Traffic Control. So there's literally the guys in the control tower at SeaTac Airport or Portland Airport, PDX. But where Cliff Ammerman was air traffic control, they deal with sort of the broader national airway system. There are various regions around the country that, each region has its own airspace. Now, I think what you're referring to is as the jet was leaving Seattle, it reached a threshold where it transitioned to a different region, a different altitude, a different region. And there's typically a handoff to the next controller. And that was bungled. It was bungled. So there was a period of time, and off the top of my head, I want to say it was something around 15 minutes or so, where whoever Flight 305 was communicating with, it was the wrong air traffic controller. It was the air traffic controller at a different level, different altitude. Now, why that's important? It's not that the jet was in any real imminent danger or anything else, but why that's really important is that the conversations during that 15-minute period of time or thereabouts, we don't have transcripts of that conversation. Now, critically, this is the time when DB Cooper jumped. So, in particular, the co-pilot, a guy named Bill Radicek, whom I've also had conversations with about this, he's expressed this publicly, but he also told me this personally, that at the time DB Cooper was walking down the stairs, it was obvious in the cockpit, based upon sort of the instruments kind of fluttering a little bit, that something was going on, that DB Cooper was messing around with the stairs. Then there's sort of a pressure bump that they attribute to DB Cooper actually leaving the stairs, and the air stairs springing back up like a diving board into the fuselage, the back bottom of the fuselage, and creating this sort of light popping sensation in the ears. And Bill Radicek told me that he mentioned something to the air traffic control ATC that, mark your shrimp boats or mark your whatever. This is, I think our friend just took leave of us. Words to that effect. The problem is we don't have that in the transcripts. Why that would have been nice to have in the transcripts is the transcripts were timed with absolute precision. We would have known exactly when DB Cooper jumped, and we don't. We have a pretty good idea within 1 or 2 minutes, but we really don't know precisely when he jumped. And when you got a jet traveling 3 miles a minute, well, you can see that's a little bit of a problem.
Sure.
So that's how, as a practical matter, it's kind of messed things up to some degree. And that's not the only example. That's not the only example of mistakes being made along the path of this jet. Not only on the part of like air traffic control in this case, but also the FBI in particular as they've investigated.
Sure. Now, if another briefcase or even the bomb-making material, parachute, any type of additional evidence, even some more bills were to pop up either in the woods or in society, and we could prove that through serial numbers, how would that change the case? Would it reopen the FBI case pretty much immediately?
Yeah, I think it would. I think the FBI has said as much. I think they would open it at least temporarily to exhaust that new lead. Sure. As a practical matter, let's say you found a $20 bill. I don't know that it would really. I don't know that there's much we could learn, unless, of course, it was a situation where somebody pulled it out of their piggy bank and it had been sitting there for 50 years, and Uncle Joe gave them this $20 bill as a birthday gift, 50 years ago, and it just kind of sat in the piggy bank. Well, then obviously that would be critical. But if it's just one of those things where you just happen to get it out of an ATM, right. I don't know that there's much you can get out of it. And I'm not sure what was the other. Was there another part to your question there as far as the?
I was just wondering how it would change the case. Yeah, if any of the materials were found.
Yeah, now that that is important, and that's why I'm searching, and I've been searching, and I'm going to continue to search because I'm trying to find new evidence.
Absolutely.
There's nothing better than getting our hands on some new evidence, you know. So,
Especially with you and your YouTube channel, if you were to find it, pull your camera out, man, you're going viral.
that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's right. Just Eric Ulis. Just go to YouTube and search Eric Ulis. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I am searching on the 17th of September, so that's coming up in about 3 weeks here, and I'm going to
ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to continue to search, but I will be filming this stuff. A lot of this stuff is going to be filmed, so I'll be putting really kind of hot off the press, active content on my YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to just go to YouTube and look up Eric Ulis, Ericulis, you can find my channel, subscribe, and that stuff will just pop up there when it pops up. But that's really important. That evidence is really important for a couple of reasons. Now, the parachutes, there's some value in that, but you know, I don't know. I mean, probably not a hell of a lot, other than it gives us a really good idea where the guy landed, which I think settles an old question: where did he actually land? But if there are components of the bomb, which I think was fake, but let's say he discarded the attaché case at the same time, and it still had the components of the bomb in there, there's a very good chance that that attaché case is still closed and buttoned up and, you know, buried under some organic debris or what have you. There's a very good chance that the electrical tape that was used would contain some DNA, because that shit's sticky. We've all touched electrical tape. It's really sticky. So that's going to have pulled off some genetic material, as well as it could contain a fingerprint. Not to mention the components themselves, the road flares, the batteries, whatever is in there. We can figure out, well, where did it come from? Where did the attaché case came from? Okay, it came from Sears. It's a model 2500. I mean, there are things we can do to kind of help kind of go back in time and figure out where these things came from, and ultimately where DB Cooper came from. Again, putting aside the electrical tape and the DNA and everything else that could come from it. So that could be an enormous breakthrough if we found something like that.
Sure.
But yeah, so it's important.
Rich, you're up.
Yeah. Last week when Aaron was here, we asked him who his number one candidate was. And I'd like to ask you, out of the cast of characters who were or are D.B. Cooper or Dan Cooper, do you have a theory of who your candidate would be out of those, or would it be somebody out of the blue different?
I think how I want to answer this question. I am currently working an angle of this case that is new and I think is really important. And I'm not going to speak too much to it, but I will say this much. I do not believe that any of the people that have been mentioned thus far as suspects, persons of interest, or what have you, are DB Cooper.
Sure.
I don't think any of these people are DB Cooper. And so, you know, and that goes even with me talking about, for example, Vince Peterson more recently. I've said many times before that I think he's either DB Cooper or he was very close to DB Cooper. I don't believe he was DB Cooper, but I do believe he was very close to DB Cooper. So, so I'll just answer the question that way. I don't think any of the persons of interest or suspects that have been hammered out so far, who have been put forward thus far, are DB Cooper. And I think that's pretty easy to demonstrate based upon the physical evidence that came from the tie. And it's an interesting thing to me that as people bring forward new suspects, and it happens constantly, the one thing that nobody ever really seems to have a good explanation for is the tie. You know, DB Cooper's tie. How did he get all these particles, rare earth elements, you know, specialty metals, titanium, alloyed and commercially pure titanium, zinc, copper, tin, stainless steel, aluminum, all these things. How did these things, where exactly was DB Cooper to collect all of these things in the late 1960s, maybe as late as 1971? And typically nobody has a really good explanation, and which is a problem
Right.
You know, if you can't explain the tie, then he ain't the guy. It just comes down to that. It's as simple as that. If it doesn't match the evidence, then he isn't him. You know, I don't care how badass his story is, Green Beret, you know, whatever, killed people on the weekends. I don't, it's all meaningless. I mean, stories in a DB Cooper case are a dime a dozen. You know, badass stories of badass guys are a dime a dozen. It doesn't impress me, and who cares? I'm interested in the evidence and tying DB Cooper or suspects or persons of interest to the evidence as far as we understand it, and ultimately putting a finger on the guy in that way.
Sure. Is DB Cooper James Bond or an evil criminal?
Well, he's a criminal, to be sure. I think he was out of his element. I don't think that he was a career criminal. I think this was a one-off event. I think he's a pretty bright guy. I think he got jammed up, and this was his ticket out. I think he was successful. You know, obviously he didn't physically harm anybody, but to be sure, it did cause some mental anguish and stress, in particular among the family and the crew. You know, the captain of the flight, who's since passed, Bill Scott. I know his daughter quite well. His daughter was 16 years of age at the time that the skyjacking took place. And, you know, I've had conversations with her about, you know, what it was like, because they kind of knew in real time. You know, they were like, you know, they were communicating with Northwest Orient via telephone, you know, getting sort of updates on this thing as it was unfolding, and they didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, they don't know if the guy's going to blow up the jet or the thing's going to go down and she's going to lose her father and all this. You know, I mean, we look at it now and hey, the guy's DB Cooper. You know, he kind of rolled like James Bond, but at the time it's happening, it's a different story. So, to be sure, there was some mental anguish and anxiety tied in with that, but beyond that, you know, as far as even the flight crew itself, like for example, the flight attendant Tina Mucklow, who had conversations with him, she's publicly stated that he was, you know, basically a gentleman, skyjacking the jet, threatening everybody, notwithstanding. You know, he didn't curse. There was no cursing involved, and he wasn't threatening to blow up people with a gun or anything. You know, I mean, he was, all things considered, pretty gentlemanly, as odd as that sounds, which I think, you know, accounts for something. You know what I'm saying? So I think they realize, listen, we play ball with the guy. We don't mess around. We just give him what he wants. We'll be left alone and we'll be fine. And ultimately, that's what happened. So
sure. Now, Rich, you had a interesting idea last week on our first DB Cooper episode, and that was around the possibility of the attaché case containing a ham radio of some sort. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, that's just my theory, that would it have been possible that in that attaché case that he had road flares that he could possibly use for either some type of signaling or illumination on his way down, and possibly a CB radio, which he could have a co-conspirator on the ground to coordinate his trip out of Dodge to get out of there. Is there been any investigation or any talk about anything like that happening?
Well, as far as the road flares and using them to signal on the way down, I don't think that, like, I don't think that's possible. And this is what I mean. First of all, I think it'd be a foolish idea, because, you know, anybody in the greater Vancouver area who's looking up at the sky is going to see these UFO objects descending from the sky. And what better way to draw attention to yourself than be lit up like a, you know, the center of attention, like Elvis, you know, giving a performance mid-air, you know. So I think that's a really, really bad idea. The other thing is a practical matter. When do you light them? You know, you sure as hell not lighting them once you jump from the jet. You're not lighting them. So you would have had to light them on the jet. And there's just simply no evidence of something of that nature being burned in the back of the jet before he jumps out. So I just don't think that's possible. A radio, sure, that's entirely possible. Maybe he had some sort of accomplice on the ground somewhere that he could contact through shortwave radio, that type of thing. I think the really big problem with that would be, where are you?
Right.
DB Cooper lands somewhere in the woods. I'm like, hey, Joe, I'm on the ground. Well, where the hell are you? I don't know. I mean, how do you know where you are? So that's a really big problem. It seems much more likely that if he had an accomplice and he was looking to get secreted out of the area by way of an accomplice, it seems to me that his best course of action would have been to walk to the nearest payphone and then make a call from the payphone. From the payphone, you could obviously ascertain reasonably quickly where you actually are. So that's kind of just how my view of it. So I don't think that he used a radio or anything of that nature. As a practical matter, it just seems very daunting. I also don't think he had an accomplice on the ground. I don't think it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary, and I just don't think he had one. There's nothing to indicate that he had one.
Did the FBI look into any sort of like hotel records or anything like that? Because there is that $1 million question of where did he come from? How did he get to the airport? Car, how did he get there? And I've listened to some of your podcasts. I kind of had an Eric Ulis week at work. I had you in one ear listening to all your shows, so I was kind of preparing for this. And I've heard you talk about if he didn't get that back seat in the plane, the back row, he might have just taken the flight and then just planned another one. So did the FBI look into any of these possible hotel stays, into any strange aliases?
Yeah, the FBI looked extensively around Portland at hotels, motels, rental car agencies, bus drivers, taxi drivers, restaurants in the airport around the area. So they did look extensively into that area and try to ascertain where he came from. And they came away empty-handed. They even looked at the parking garage, cars that maybe were abandoned in the parking garage at the airport, things of that nature. Came away with nothing. I know that they at some point wanted to look into passenger manifests for flights, but this was longer than 6 months out from the skyjacking. Why that's important is because the airlines, I'm not sure why, but the records of passengers and that kind of thing were just discarded or destroyed after 6 months. So in other words, they couldn't come up with a list of passengers that had flown in earlier that day. I don't know that it would have meant a hell of a lot anyway, because back then, 71, you didn't need to present any identification or a real name. So, Leroy Jones could have been DB Cooper flying in from Seattle that morning, and then he flew out as Dan Cooper later that afternoon. And how are you ever going to put that together?
Sure.
So that's I don't know that there's much that could have been gleaned from that, but they did look into it. They even went as far as looking into payphones. They looked at payphone records around that whole Vancouver area where they believe he jumped. Not the whole area, but sort of the area where they believed he jumped. They looked at payphone records to see if maybe he did exactly what I described. He went to the nearest payphone and called somebody, but they came away with nothing. There wasn't a hell of a lot of payphone activity, as you can imagine, on Thanksgiving Eve in the middle of nowhere, but there were some. There were some long distance calls and things that were placed. So the authorities did look into it. I have to say, on measure, I think the authorities actually did a pretty good job. They were pretty thorough in terms of trying to figure out who this guy was, where he came from, where he went, what happened. But obviously, the more the time went by, they just came away with nothing, came away empty-handed.
Sure. Rich, what do you got?
I have one quick question, and this really doesn't have to do with DB Cooper, but with the airplane. I've read that they took that airplane to Reno as planned, and it was landed with the stairs down. And I often wondered, did that actually happen? They actually landed a 727 with the air stairs deployed. Do you know anything about that?
That is exactly what happened. The air stairs. It's important for people to understand that the Boeing 727 was unique. There was one other jet, a DC-9, that had the same sort of thing, but it was unique in the sense that they had these air stairs that would deploy from the back bottom of the fuselage. Now, the reason that it was designed with air stairs is that the 727 itself was designed to service smaller airports that didn't have necessarily um, a jetway to get to board passengers or deplane passengers, or maybe they didn't have, a pickup truck that had this kind of has the stairs on the back of the pickup truck to help people get up on the jet and off the jet. So the nice thing about a 727 is you could land at a small airport, and people could board the jet or deplane the jet with just the jet itself. It didn't need any additional equipment on the ground. So in the case of DB Cooper, he jumped from those rear air stairs, and there was no way to pull them back up. I mean, mid-flight, there may have been there must have been some way to pull them back up mid-flight, but that would have entailed them going to the back and then somehow affecting something and having the stairs, hydraulically pulled back up. But they didn't do that because they were not permitted. The flight crew was not permitted, according to Cooper's orders, to come in the back. So ultimately, they did land the jet with the air stairs open, and the air stairs, hit the ground, obviously hit the runway and dragged along the runway and everything else. The damage that was done was minimal, wasn't a big deal. I mean, the jet was able to fly the very next day back up to Seattle. But yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Cool. I do have a question from an audience member here. Pond Poppin' Dan asks, why did the FBI give up on the case? Did they think it wasn't important?
Well, I'll just tell you what the FBI said. The reason that they said that they closed the case down, which was 2016. So at that point, it'd been 45 years. Basically, they determined that, by 2016, 45 years later, DB Cooper probably is no longer alive. That's the first thing. And they really have nothing to work with at this point. And they just, as a practical matter, expending taxpayer dollars on trying to determine who DB Cooper was 45 years earlier just doesn't seem a prudent way to be spending taxpayer dollars when you've got terrorism and all that kind of stuff you need to concern yourself with. So they basically closed the case. They decided we give up, we call uncle on that, throw up our hands, we close it. Of course, they always reserve the right to reopen it if somebody later on finds the parachute or some of the money or something else happens. But it just ceased being an active investigation. Not that it was particularly active beforehand, but it just ceased being an active investigation up to that point. So I don't think there's anything nefarious there. I don't think there was a government cover-up or anything of that nature. I just think it's just a business decision at that point to shut the case, close the case down.
Sure. Rich, you're up.
No, I've got it.
You got it. Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about the search that's going to be going on September 17th out in around the Tina Bar area, and your theory as to where he jumped? Do you want to talk about your search and what your plans are for the future?
Sure. I mean, I'll just say that I am absolutely convinced of a couple of things in this case. And one of those couple of things in this case is that the drop zone where the FBI believed DB Cooper jumped is wrong. I think they're off by a handful of miles.
Sure.
And therefore, that's why they haven't found anything at all after 51 years or 54 years rather in that area. Nothing to indicate the guy was ever there. Moreover, what was found, $6,000 of DB Cooper's money on February 10th, 1980, was found in a spot completely unrelated to where the FBI believes he jumped. And again, the money is evidence. The evidence doesn't lie. The evidence doesn't have an agenda. The evidence speaks to the truth.
Sure.
And I think what the evidence, in this case, the money is telling us is that where DB Cooper actually jumped and actually landed was very near where the money was found. That $6,000 was found. So that is an area, very importantly, that has never been searched by the FBI. Now, the immediate beach area where the money was found in 1980 was searched. They were looking for additional money, parachute, anything else. They didn't find anything. And of course, over the intervening decades, Mother Nature has had her way with that beach and has stripped it away. It has completely eroded away. So even if the FBI had overlooked something in 1980 during their cursory search of the area, it would have certainly been unearthed by Mother Nature herself at some point thereafter, and it just never happened. Now, moving off the beach, moving inland a little bit further, half a mile away from the beach, a mile away from the beach, to some of this basically open agricultural field in some areas where there are tranches of trees and that type of thing. That area has never been searched outside of some searching that I've done there. So that's the area that I'm looking because I firmly believe that where DB Cooper actually jumped and landed put him probably half a mile to a mile away from Tina Bar, and probably landed in a field, an open agricultural field, because about 95% of the land there is just that, it's just open, growing corn and that kind of stuff. And I believe that DB Cooper, being a man of relatively sound mind, landing after descending from the clouds with a big white parachute, probably his first thought was, I got to get the hell out of Dodge. I mean, maybe somebody saw me landing, and is the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines going to immediately show up in this field here in the next 10 minutes? So I think he immediately lands, balls up the parachute, and immediately runs to the woods, because there's some woods that kind of surround the field, those fields around there. Probably immediately ran to the nearest stand of trees or woods. And once he was safely out of the middle of a field, I think he took off the stuff, discarded it, and then made his way to the beach, to the Columbia River, to what was ultimately Tina Bar, for the purpose of burying the money temporarily in a place different from where he discarded the parachutes and maybe even the bomb. And there are a couple of practical reasons for that. The parachutes and that kind of stuff just hastily chucked in a field, whatever. Maybe a dog smells it and uncovers it. You don't want your $200,000 sitting there at the same time. So you want to separate those two items. But the other thing is the earth there, the ground there is quite hard. It'd be very, very difficult and time consuming to bury the money there in one of those agricultural fields or areas. Tina Bar, the sand, a completely different story. In fact, I had a recreation of the event a few years ago, where I essentially recreated landing there with 70 pounds worth of parachute and gear. Went to Tina Bar, just using my hands, stick, rocks, whatever I could find, whatever implements I could find on the ground, buried the $200,000 in cash. And I had a bag that was properly sized to see how long it would take. And then I walked 11 miles down the only road out of the area to Vancouver to see how long it would take and see how easy it would be. And it was no problem. It took me about 2.5 hours to do it. It was no big deal. Importantly, the money, burying the money on the beach, it took me 90 seconds. It took me 90 seconds to show up on the beach with this 20-pound bag of cash, just with my hands, carve out a hole in the sand, throw the cash in the sand, cover it back up to where you couldn't see that was anything buried there, and leave. It took 90 seconds. Very easy to do. So I think that's what happened. I think that's exactly what DB Cooper did. So now, having said all that, the parachutes, I believe, are still there, and there were two parachutes. They're somewhere in that area there. And I've identified a few spots that are of particular interest to me, that if he would have discarded them in these areas, and typically I'm looking at areas that are, sort of like depressions in the ground, like holes in the ground, basically, or sort of like catch basins almost, that are overgrown with sticker bushes and trees and have water in them at certain points of the year. If he had simply gone to the edge and chucked the parachutes into this area here, just given the nature of the vegetation and everything else, they would still be there today. You would never see them. You never find them. Nobody's walking down in these areas because they're pretty hazardous. And I think that's where that's where the stuff would still be. So that's what I'm doing. I'm shagging my ass down there and kind of hacking through with a machete and going foot by foot, painstakingly, trying to see if the parachutes are somewhere in that area there. And
awesome.
the parachutes are durable. I mean, these, they're canvas, and there's a good possibility that those are still around. Maybe they're somewhat rotted, but importantly, there are a lot of stainless steel components that make up these parachutes, those rigs. The stainless steel is still there. That isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So So that's what I'm looking for. And like I said, also perhaps even the attaché case that carries the bomb.
That would be awesome. I hope you find something, and I would love to see it on your YouTube channel. What a amazing, just upload that would be, and way to potentially get some answers on this case. That'd be so awesome.
Sure would be.
That'd be great.
It's time.
What's that?
It is time.
Oh yeah, it is time.
It is time, and like I said, I mean, there's a part of it. This is just fun. I mean, that's just the way my mind works. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I've always been. I mean, like I've said before, I mean, I was the kid who needed to figure out how to do the Rubik's Cube, and my background professionally actually is from the world of professional card counting blackjack thing. You guys are from the Boston area, so you're probably familiar with the MIT guys that played, go to Vegas. That's my world. That's where I came from. So, and that, that part of that is just beating the casino at their own game, figuring out how to beat the game of blackjack in this case. So that's just how my mind works. That's the stuff I love. So in the case of the DB Cooper mystery, there's that part of me, that competitive part of me that's like, you know what? I'm going to be the guy who figures it out. I want to be the guy who solves this thing. And I think it is solvable. I think it's eminently solvable. And there we go. But so it's fun to do. I think it eventually will be solved. I like to think that I'm as well positioned as anybody to be the guy to solve it, because I think, putting boots on the ground is a really important part of this thing. But beyond that, there's, there are other avenues to pursue as well. Outside of the boots on the ground aspect, there's the other stuff with the type particles, the stuff where, you're bringing stuff into a lab and you're trying to ascertain the evidence, and you're looking at the data and what does the data tell us and everything else. So that's sort of the second major prong of the investigation here. But one way or the other, we'll figure out who this guy was.
Eric, thank you so much for coming onto the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and your morning to come by, zoom in, and be on. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Anytime, guys. Just let me know when.
Yeah, and good luck on your expedition.
Absolutely. We're talking about doing an episode on the Gardner Museum, right up the street. I'd love to chat with you about the Gardner Museum. That whole thing's crazy to me. So
yeah,
I'd love to talk to you about that in the future at some point.
Yeah, I'm down with the Gardner Museum because that's another really, really interesting case. And
I've started watching some of your stuff on, examining the fire pit particles and looking at the canvas and stuff. I've already started.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's all science based. You know what I'm saying? There's like the science part of it. You find some, you dig into a fireplace and you start finding stuff that's consistent with 16th century paint or canvases, and it's like, well, how did that stuff get here? Right. So that's what it's about. But yeah, the Gardner Museum, the one thing about the Gardner Museum is I think it actually, in a lot of ways, I think that's a little easier to solve. It's easier to figure out. I think I'm convinced Brian McDevitt was the guy behind it.
I would love to go over it with you one day via Zoom, something like this. Go over it.
Yeah, we can go over it all. Yeah.
Absolutely. So. Well, I wish you the best of luck with the investigation. I can't wait to hear about it. I'm already subscribed on your channel. I've been watching, and I'm
good man.
I'm definitely going to be following it. And if you want, I encourage you to send me through text or email all of your links where people can find you, your website, YouTube, different podcasts that you've been on. If you have those particular links, anywhere that people can go and keep track of everything, please send it to me. All that stuff will be in the description. All that will be in the pinned comments. So I encourage the audience, please make sure that you go and follow Eric. This is it. So Eric, thank you again so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, guys.
I wish you luck 1 7-up at a time.
There you go. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Have a good one, Eric. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye.
So, Rich, what do we think happened?